Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. Morning, afternoon, evening, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Welcome, good thinkers, to the Good Thinking Live show, to the Good Thinking Show live. If you're tuning in from LinkedIn or from YouTube live, let us know who you are and where you're from. We are going to get into some interesting cognitive biases that are a particular cognitive bias that is very, very common. I kind of think in some ways this is like the grandmother of all cognitive biases, and when it matters and when it doesn't, and when it can lead us astray. All right, here we go. So definitely participate, join. We know the value of good storytelling in business. You can take thousands of incredible courses on how to tell your story in a way that will stick, that will be memorable, that people will take action. So storytelling makes us construct a coherent story from a bunch of facts. And if someone creates that story for us, great. Then it helps us along. All right. So here is the question. I'm going to ask you the question, and then I'm going to say hi to the good thinkers who have already joined early. The first question is there a downside to stories? Is there a downside to stories? In that we have all these facts, and we take in these facts, and we try to make sense of the world with story. Otherwise, they're just random facts that just kind of float around in our brains or in the atmosphere. All right, so is there a downside to stories? Jennifer, good morning. Good morning. Oh, cute glasses, she says. What do you guys think? These are my new orange. Orange is my favorite color. So today I'm kind of like this clash with the art in the back and my crazy shirt and my glasses and my red earbuds. It's a clash. But anyway, thank you. Let's say good morning, Rashi. Let's say hi to Lita. Welcome from the Canary Islands. Yes, here we go. Here we go is right. All the good thinkers. Rubelina, good morning. Michael, good morning from Toronto. So we have a lot of really good thinkers, some regulars and some new. Welcome if you're regulars. Rubber chickens are ready to be given, and welcome if you are new to the show. We're here most Mondays right here on LinkedIn Live and on YouTube Live. All right, so can you think of a time? All right, this is the question. And so this is a yes or no. So no one said, is there a downside to stories? Is there a downside to stories? So people are starting to say, but Barkley, good morning from DC. And Mr. Dieng, welcome from Senegal. Yes. And Jennifer, so Jennifer says, if the story is recreated to be false and fools you to think it's true, then not good. Well, but how do you determine if a story is false? How do you determine if a story is false? Maybe it doesn't make sense to your worldview. Or maybe some of the pieces need to be shoved in, or maybe you ignore some of the pieces to keep the story intact. How do you know if a story is false? We're going to get into that. Stephen, greetings from one of the 4 cities in the U.S. with an extinct volcano within its city limits. Extinct. Does that mean it could blow at some point in time? Does an extinct volcano mean that it is forever dead? Or is it just like hibernating? What makes an extinct volcano versus a dormant volcano? I'm curious. What's the story about volcanoes? If anyone knows, you can put it in the chat as we go on with story. All right, so here's the next question. And this is something personal. So I want you to try to think about this because this will frame everything for today and help us learn to overcome the narrative bias. All right, can you think of a time, a specific time, not when someone else, but you, a time when you drew a false conclusion from accurate facts? So all the facts were reliable and they all came together and you drew in a false conclusion from accurate facts. Now, if something doesn't come to mind, think harder. And if something doesn't come to mind, that may be a sign that an awareness of the narrative fallacy is going to be very helpful to you. Now, I want to say this. Stories are really helpful. It's not like stories are all bad. But stories can be mental simplifiers that in this case where you're trying to make strategic decisions or important strategic predictions about what to believe or what to do, decision-making, high-stakes decision-making, a story can be a mental simplifier that can lead us astray. All right, we're going to get into it. I'm going to tell you a story and see what you guys think. All right, Stephen says, dormant volcanoes can come back to life. So is a dormant volcano the same as an extinct volcano? Curious about that. All right, here's the story. So get ready, get ready, get ready. This is a famous story, and you might have even heard about this if you're a big fan of the behavioral scientists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They made up this story. It's the Linda story. All right. For those of you on the East Coast of the United States, the Linder story. Anyway, all right, so here's the story. You ready? Listen to this story about Linda. Then I'm going to ask you some questions. All right. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and she also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. All right, so that's Linda. Ready for the question? Here's the question. Which alternative is more probable? Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. So Linda, so you could say bank teller plus feminist movement. Or you could say A or B if you want to be quick. But in the thread, then we can see what people say. Sometimes the thread, if people are joining the live stream after it's live, they only see A and B. They may not know what you're talking about. All right, so is it more likely that Linda is a bank teller, or more likely that she's a bank teller plus she's active in the feminist movement? All right, that's the question. So get your answers there, and then I'll tell you what Kahneman and Tversky found with many people to whom they put this question. All right. This question demonstrates the power of narrative, because we're so willing to take a description and mentally categorize the person it describes, in this case, a feminist bank teller. Now, a feminist bank teller is much more salient because it's much more detail, which you'll learn in storytelling and business storytelling, that you want to create this mental imagery that puts your client or prospective customer in the story. All right. So it's much more salient that she's a feminist bank teller. All right. So we've got A. Michael says A, she's a bank teller. Lita says B, she's a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. Raj Shri says B. We're splitting it up. Barkley says A, she's a bank teller. What's more likely? What's more likely? Jennifer's bank teller. Stephen says bank teller. What's more likely? What's more probable? What's more likely? Likely that she's a bank teller. Because anytime you add information to a subset, you have to decrease the probability of each of those things happening. So someone else says B, she's a feminist movement. So about 85% to 90% of undergraduates at several major universities chose B. And we all do. It's like, it's so vivid in our minds, all of these things that tell us she's got to be active in the feminist movement. But statistically, just that she's a bank teller is much more statistically likely than she's a bank teller plus anything else. Okay, so we now know that the power of story is there, even when we're like on guard that we know that there might be some trick answer. It's really powerful. Our brains are storytelling machines. But this highlights one of the downsides to stories, is that they can lead us astray. And if none of the good thinkers, maybe some of you can, you just didn't want to say, can think of a time when very accurate facts that we put together in our minds, concocted into a story, led us to a false conclusion, then we know that that's a hint that the narrative fallacy is afoot. All right, I'm going to give you another one. And so Michael admits, yeah, he cheated. He read Kahneman, and I cheated too. And I am not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure that I would have let my mind stay true to the statistical likelihood and not let the narrative seep in, because I'm human. Haroon says, I believe that there's not enough to inform the story to make the decision whether it's A or B. Well, as it turns out, even in our minds, we can't, but there is any time that and this is kind of stats, anytime that there is a probability of one thing and a probability of one thing plus another thing, the probability of the one thing is statistically more probable. That's kind of what it is. So, it's not about whether she's a bank teller or not. You don't have enough information to determine that. But you do have enough to say that it's more probable that she's a bank teller than it is probable that she's a bank teller plus anything else. And that's that. So you've kind of touched on Haroon, you've kind of touched on that. But between not a bank teller and a bank teller, sure, we don't have enough information, but we do know what's more probable. All right. So let's say you're a sales manager and you get a call from your top sales rep. All right. Let's say Raj is your top sales rep and Raj calls you to tell you that your biggest competitor, Acme Company, just won business against your company twice in a row. Like you went out on a sales call and you lost out to Acme twice in a row. And Acme is your biggest competitor. And Raj tells you that in both cases, Acme underbid your company. They quoted a lower price. And Raj also told you, and you're the sales manager, you're the boss, also told you that Acme is trying to recruit some of your best sales reps and that you should review your pricing because Acme undercut you and Raj in your pricing. All right. So you've got this information, you've got these facts. So now you're going to go, because you're experienced, you're not just going to take Raj's word for it. You're going to go and investigate. You're going to check facts. All right. So you call another trusted sales rep, Susan, and Susan confirms your fears when she tells you that she did renew a contract with a long-term client, but it was touch and go because Acme's pricing was significantly lower. So now you're like, this is starting to tell a story. All right. What is the story it is starting to tell? What is your brain now thinking you should consider doing? Okay. If you have anything, what should you consider doing? You've been undercut. You've got this information. What is your brain considering? But you don't make a decision yet. So you check with the HR to see if any of the people who've recently quit have gone to work for Acme. You check facts and you find that 2 sales reps who did leave did go to work for Acme. So the story is clear. Acme is going after your people and your business. What should you do? Can you ignore this? Can you ignore this with the information you have? Do you have enough to act on? Should you now at least consider a price reduction? Should you consider a price reduction? Should that be a consideration? Yes or no? Price reduction or no? Should this be a consideration? All right. So while you're thinking about that, I'm going to tell you that what Raj told you was a story with a lot of details left out. Not because he was intentionally leaving information out, but because his brain had put together the facts in a way that were obvious to him, in a story that made sense to him. And your brain was soaking up this story for 2 main reasons. All right. Number 1, there were a lot of specific details that were realistic and narrative. He went after this business and Acme underbid him. So the specific details, and the more specificity, the more juicy it is for our brain. And the number 2 reason is cause and effect explanations, which help us understand why certain events lead to final outcomes. So what were you doing when you went to Susan, the other sales rep? Would it be fair to say that you were doing your job? Were you confirming the story? I mean, isn't that what a good leader should do, is not just take Raj's word for it? It turns out that in this case, that's exactly what you were doing. You were confirming the story, but you weren't verifying facts. And this is where the rubber meets the road when you need to, and how to avoid falling into the narrative bias trap. All right. A traditional definition of the narrative bias trap is people's tendency to interpret information as being part of a larger story or pattern. Everything has to be part of a larger story or pattern. There can't be randomness, can there be? Does everything have to be part of a larger story or pattern in your brain? Yes or no? Where are your answers? Where are we? No one wants to get caught. Listen, I make mistakes all the time. I guess this or that. It's okay. Good thinkers can say, oops, I'm glad I made a mistake. Good thinkers aren't afraid of making mistakes, and they're not afraid of changing their mind. So put it out there. Put it out there. Do you think that every fact needs to be part of a larger story? Or should you consider the element of entropy and randomness? Whatever. So a narrative fallacy leads us to see events as stories with a logical chain of cause and effect. It's actually a backwards looking mental tripwire that causes us to attribute a linear and discernible cause and effect chain to our knowledge of the past. All right, so Fahad says, welcome, hello, everyone. Michael says, yes, everything needs to be part of a larger story. All right, so my question is, why? How does randomness fit in to the fact that everything needs to be part of a larger story? You say, well, randomness needs to be part of a larger story, so then how do you know that it has to be part of a larger story? All right, here's the problem with this kind of working definition of narrative bias that I have, at least, and I'll be curious to see what you guys think, or you all think. You can draw false conclusions from accurate facts. And we do this because our brains love a story, and then we go looking to see if the story is true, and we fall prey to other cognitive biases. That's why narrative bias is kind of a grandmother of biases, because our confirmation bias, where we have heard the story, and now we're going to prove or disprove the story. So we interpret information that confirms the story and fail to even seek out information that might completely disprove the story. So in the example of the Acme company, HR confirmed your suspicions because you asked for facts to confirm your suspicions. But given the historic attribution, like the attribution of why, what are the reasons why companies decide to go with your company versus Acme? Well, maybe Acme's price is lower, but are they offering the same product? Are they offering the same services? Or given the historic attrition rate of your company, is having 2 sales reps quit all that unusual? I mean, over what period of time? Maybe you're looking at, in the last, 47 days, 2 sales reps quit. Well, maybe expand out. How often do sales reps quit in each 6-month period? And how unlikely is it for a sales rep to go to your biggest competitor? Is this statistically significant to worry about, or is this just like in the course of business? But instead, it's a fact that fits the story that Acme is going after your business. Well, obviously, if it's your biggest competitor, it's going after your business. That is what you do. And that you need to reduce your prices because you've lost out to Acme. Well, in this case, how often does Raj not get an account or 2? Is that unusual for Raj not to get an account? Or is maybe a little bit of an excuse that I didn't get that account because Acme offered a lower price? So what's normal? Could the story be preventing you from looking at base rates? So base rates are outside of the story, what commonly happens in similar situations. So what's your attrition rate of losing employees? What's your acquisition rate of gaining clients? You look at these base rates, but a story just locks you in so you don't step outside to look at base rates. Now, is Acme offering the same product? So you believed you were checking facts when you called Susan, and you believed you were checking facts when you called HR, but you were really seeking to verify the story, and the answers you got sealed the story. Fact checking is not the same as story checking. So your definition of the problem was shaped by Raj's story. You had fallen into the narrative bias trap. So what can you do to avoid the narrative bias trap when you hear a story that you're using to decide what to do or what to believe? Is it such a big deal to Do you always have to question a story? Like if someone tells you a story, do you have to always be such a skeptic? Well, ideally, you do if you were using the story to decide what to believe or what to do in any way that's important, whether it's creating your worldview or deciding how to plan your future or understanding what the future of work will look like or making a strategic decision. Yeah, in that case, an awareness of the narrative bias is the first step in having it not in lessening its ability to lead you astray. All right, so what does Haroon say? Haroon says there has to be a backstory, but we can't just put a line there. I believe before linking our fact with any kind of story, we must evaluate the fact in the own capacity with all four angles of the picture. And then we must have a logical link to the story we're going to connect to that fact. Okay, great. Great ways of thinking about story. Let's say that, let's say that someone told the story. Actually, this is a famous story of Steve Jobs. Some reporter said, and a lot of people have said, that if Steve Jobs hadn't grown up with this adversity where he learned that his father was his adoptive father and not his biological father, and his father made him do all these things and looked at things from a logical standpoint, that Steve Jobs would never have been, this amazing, successful revolutionary that he is. But when you look at the base rates of the number of people that might have been exposed to similar things or grown up not knowing that their adoptive father is their biological father, all of the same things, and you look at the base rates of the people who have experienced that, who have not become Steve Jobs, you start to realize that that's a nice story, but it's a story that's also related to survival bias, where we don't read the stories of the companies and the people who followed as much of the same prescription as the successful people, but just didn't have a book written about them because they weren't that successful in that way. So this narrative bias is much more tricky than we think it is. And our brains have a hard time of admitting or even perceiving when narrative bias is afoot. But there are some ways. So if you are a decision maker, Michael says, you need to look at a bigger picture and understand the situation. You probably also need to account for bias and account for noise in the system with math, because we can't think our way out of thinking problems when we're using the tool to think our way out of thinking problems. So there is some math, and we are going to be at Applied Curiosity Lab. We're going to be launching in 2022 a high stakes decision-making training and coaching protocol that will help people put some of this math in the form of behavior to reducing the impact of noise and reducing the impact of irrationality on our decisions. So this is going to be a fun thing. Let me know if you think that's interesting. Maybe I kind of made it too heady, but describing it initially. All right, so first of all, the awareness of narrative bias means you're already part of the way there in dispelling its magical effect of leading you astray. All right, number 2, seek disconfirming evidence. So when you are told facts that make sense in a story, and you're now trying to decide whether the story is true or not, take some of the facts that you're using to verify. So, okay, instead of asking, did 2 of our sales reps quit to go to work for Acme? Check mark, yes. Therefore, the story makes more sense. Instead, find disconfirming evidence. And that doesn't mean trying to find out if in fact they didn't leave to go to Acme, but try to find out either using base rates, which we'll get into, or which we mentioned, or whether you find something like, okay, what were some of the other reasons? Is Acme offering, a lot better package? Is it very unusual for salespeople? Go looking for things that disconfirm. Or if you get told a story of why something has happened or what the reason is for something, go look for other reasons that could disconfirm the story. Actively look for things, facts, that disconfirm the story, like the fact that your company has recently hired 4 new sales reps, and you have never had this many applications to your company in your company's history. That would be a disconfirming piece of evidence that tells you, alarm, alarm, you've got a human resource problem. All right, number 3. Consider, and we mentioned this, consider and seek base rates. So if HR tells you that 2 people quit to go to Acme, how many people have applied? How often do you lose 2 people to other companies? And how often and likely is that you're going to lose these people to Acme? So you will be glad that you step back from the narrative bias to seek disconfirming facts, because you might find out that HR has had 4 sales rep applications from Acme. Like 4 people have applied from Acme, so you lost 2 to them, you gained 4 from them. Those are the kinds of things that you're going to be glad you step back from that narrative, back from that story, to help find information that can maybe tell a different story. Maybe it's just telling a different story so that you can make better sense of what to believe and how to move forward. And then be aware of the champion bias, because we often fail to recognize how easily a story with a credible source can win us over. So when the reputation of the messenger outweighs the value of the information that they bring to you, or when the champion of a project is more valuable than the project itself, like the person is so much more prestigious or so much more accomplished or so much more powerful, or your boss's boss's boss, and that value, that champion is more valuable than the information or the facts or even than the story that they tell, that can lead us astray, because we love a hero. How many of you have ever had a boss fall in love with an idea? Anyone? Yes? No? Yes? Let me know. Anyone who participates with this next question and admits that they've had a boss fall in love with an idea gets a rubber chicken. All right. Who is the champion and with whom we have the most, is the person with whom we have the most confidence? So the champion is the person in whom we have the most confidence. Have you ever had someone in whom you've had tremendous confidence tell you a story that you just believed because, number 1, it sounded like something that was true, and number 2, the person telling you the story was a champion? So Michael says many times you've had a champion where their champion status, their boss, their authority status was higher than the value of the idea or the story they told. All right. So Michael says many times, and me too. And sometimes, I think, wow, that person's really smart and they're explaining the world this way. That must make sense. But then I kind of step back and say, are there any other explanations? And that's a fun thing. Also beware of charismatic storytellers, especially when they tell us stories we want to hear. Beware of charismatic storytellers. And final thing, kind of a 2-part. Don't ignore doubts. If you don't have any doubt about a story, I'm talking about a story that you're making a big decision. Not just some cute little story. You don't need to question every story, but a story that you're really using to understand how to make sense of the world, or understand how to move forward, or understand whether or how to make a big decision. Do not ignore doubts and go looking for disconfirming facts. And the final thing is, if you're making decisions in groups, don't keep doubts to yourself. Now, this is easier said than done, because you may be in a culture where you're not allowed to share your doubts. But if you are a manager or a leader who is in charge of creating a culture, and you have created a culture where people cannot, or are required rather, to keep doubts to themselves, you have stifled the culture of curiosity necessary to see things closer to how they really are. All right. So those are some things. For every story you believe, there's many other possible stories that can come from the same facts. And what is fun sometimes is listening to those facts and just practicing, just practicing in your mind as you're taking a hike, or meditating. I'm not supposed to do this during meditation, but as you're thinking about your thinking, if you set aside time to think about your thinking, you can take a bunch of facts and see if you can weave them into a story that is different from the story that is your default story, of the story you tell yourself, the story you believe. All right. So stories have many wonderful functions. They teach, they motivate, they inspire. The problem is when we believe our stories are predictive and rely on these stories to guide us in big decisions. So even when we believe we're considering facts alone, we're telling ourselves a story. Stories can help us make sense of the world. However, if we're not aware of the narrative bias, and now you are, yay, you are, the narrative fallacy, or this kind of error in logic, can lead us to believe we understand the world in ways that maybe are more solid in our comfort, but farther from the way the world really is. And our goal with good thinking is to move us closer and closer and closer to the way things really are, understanding the role and inviting the role of randomness, luck, those kinds of things. All right. So that's the narrative bias fallacy. Thank you for joining. I hope to see you next week, next Monday, 9 a.m. here on LinkedIn Live and on YouTube Live, or 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Welcome, good thinkers from around the world, and I hope you have a great week. Thanks.